to the regular season finale of the Cigar Thoughts podcast. Your host, Jacson Bevens, writer at fieldgoals.com. With me are my editor, Danny Kelly.
What's up?
Thanks for having
Thank you for having me.
To have you. You come here often. And the editor-in-chief of What's Up magazine, Brent, who actually in this month's issue, there is a feature on Danny Kelly conducted by me in his magazine. So check it out for the trifecta, because I know you can't get enough of us. Big win for the Seahawks in a game that I am on record predicting they would lose.
Me too.
And and there was no doubt about it at any point of the game. Like I am still struggling to truly appreciate what we saw, because I wouldn't have been surprised really about that result in the last 3 years. But I was very surprised by that result. Maybe I'm just not being a great fan or whatever, but I needed to see that they could compete and beat a top-level team. And I believe that the Cardinals are, or at least were, the best team in the NFL. And the Seahawks put it on them. Put it on for the second straight year. Danny, what stood out to you most when you were watching that game?
Well, first of all, Russell Wilson was back. Because after the St. Louis game, there was a small worry that his magic carpet ride was over or whatever. Because, he was like the best quarterback of all time, and like statistically over those 5-6 games. And so after he really didn't play, I mean, it wasn't like he had a terrible game against St. Louis, but he was running all around and kind of regressed to trying to escape really quick. He ran himself into a couple sacks.
Threw an interception.
Yeah, we just can't have that. No, but he looked really, really good again, so that was encouraging. There's a couple plays that I think Matt will talk about today that were just like vintage Wilson, like changing the play at the line of scrimmage, finding isolating a guy that based on a matchup and just hitting him for a touchdown. Obviously, Kristen Michael looked good, which was really encouraging. I do a Pro Football Focus stat breakdown every week from Jim Secchi. He does that for Pro Football Focus, and I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but he led the NFL in yards after contact this week. By like a full yard. What
was his total? Because I wrote in my article that he had 101 or 102, and it felt like at least half of them were after contact. Was that close?
It was. I think it was more than half. It had to be. And he broke 5 tackles, which was the most in the NFL this week. Anyway, what Jim said is that he tried to break their elusive ratings metric, which is just great. Because it really is kind of like, again, people I think are kind of taking it low key right now because they don't want to get all excited about him and then have it be nothing again. But he could legitimately be like what we all thought he was, So that's really exciting. And the number 2 back.
Right.
Yeah.
And I wanna hear you talk about this, because something like this wave of warm emotion came over me at some point in the third quarter when I realized that next year, for like $1 million combined dollars, you could be splitting 30 touches between Thomas Rawls and a hungry Kristen Michael.
Yeah.
And that's, come on, that warmed you up. What'd you think from that? Was Kristen Michael what stood out most to you?
No, it was Tyler Lockett.
Dude.
Because as I rewatched the game, I really realized how much, if it had been Brian Walters fair catching back there, he put us in such great position in I think 3 or 4 straight drives where it was just boom, 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 all the way, with the penalty I think up to the 7 that first time.
Did you see the stat? There's no kick return or no punt returner in 10 years that's had 3 30-yard punt returns in the same game.
Unbelievable.
And it should have been 4.
Yeah.
It should have been 4. That's crazy.
So as great as the offense looked, as great as the defense looked, the Tyler Lockett put us where we could succeed so much, at the beginning. And it's just shocking how good he is. Shocking. At one point, it was like the second one, he just did a quick little woohoo, got the guy to just fake right out of his shoes,
so fast,
and he just went book it.
I was watching this with my buddy Caleb, and he's like, "You got to go back and rewatch that." So I was like, "Yeah, it was a great return." He's like, no, watch his eyes, and it was from the opposing end zone. And he is like in the middle of just discarding somebody. Like someone's trying to tackle him in the open field, and they're just like folding in half this way. And he didn't look at him once. He was looking at the next guy. So he like did a no-look ankle breaker on this tackle. Like he just set him up, and the whole time he was looking at the next dude. Like I don't know that I had ever seen that before, and I wouldn't have caught it if it wasn't for Caleb pointing it out. But I mean, we're talking about like some next level field vision.
Yeah, I mean he's like Jason Kidd. I always compare Russell Wilson to Jason Kidd, just based. Like I play basketball. Like I don't have court vision, like it's just something I don't have.
Right.
Like, some people have it, I don't. And so like it's always really cool to me when people can like they just automatically know where everyone is.
They just see it,
It's like
and
music,
to see that
man.
guys coming crashing
it's
at
like
you
music,
that.
yeah.
To see everybody crashing, and you just he was just finding these lanes, and then all of a sudden the protection really opened up. It was something to see, and I don't know how the game would have turned out. It still would have been a great Seahawks win, but he was just so good and put us in such great spots the first half that we just kind of took their soul away,
That actually, Jacson and I were talking before the podcast about what kind of plays stood out. That his I don't know which return it was numbers wise, but they scored on the Will Tukuafu touchdown, right? It was the Michael Robinson special where he pretends to pass block, he just goes straight through the line, no one picks him up, they just lob it over. That's whatever you call it, spider Y banana, or and then the next, after they stopped the Cardinals on the next drive, I think, and then the next punt was when he returned it all the way down. Plus
the Richard Sherman.
Yeah, plus got a 15-yard penalty.
Right.
So they put on, I don't even know what it was, like the 10-yard line or something.
Was this I think at 8?
Yep.
7 or 8. Yeah.
And then they ran what looked to be almost the identical play. They faked it. They faked the play to Derek Coleman.
Yeah.
And then they had Chase Kaufman run like a delayed. So basically, he looked like he was going to block. No one really paid attention to him for a second. He ran across the grain, and then I think it was Patrick Peterson was chasing him from the backside. So and then it was just an easy lob over there. So those two plays, but the middle play was the return, the big return.
Yeah.
So it was back-to-back plays though.
Yeah, and that's crazy. And something that I tweeted. Something I tweeted during that game is it reminded me of like when you're playing backyard football and you get up real big, so you start drawing up plays for your little brothers, right? Like switch out the guys who've been blocking all game. Like let's get them a touchdown. Let's drop a little something for that. That's what I felt like Bevel was doing. Like who hasn't scored a touchdown yet? All right, Chase here and Will, you got it. Yeah, I mean, and that's the kind of stuff that. When they were body bagging the entire league back in 2012, right? Remember that back half where this franchise took the. I mean,
when they destroyed the Bills.
Yeah, didn't they outscore opponents like 150-20 over a 3? I mean, we'll never see that again.
Yeah.
Like that's what it was. It was just like, all right, empty the playbook. Let's get everyone involved, and to have that kind of confidence against what is a very good defense. I mean, I'm sure they had an off day, and I wasn't trying to break them down. I don't know if they got away from what they do. They got their butts whooped, and
he played their starters into the third.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I
think he played their starters into the. I know that everybody but Palmer came back.
Yeah, he played them into the third quarter at least. I'm not sure how deep they went, but
it was at least 30-6 by the time they got pulled. So I mean, there's no flukiness. There was no looking past them.
No.
Whatever, and Steve Keim can talk about wanting to face the Seahawks again in the playoffs if he wants, but I mean, careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
I think we got a really good example of how good John and Pete are as well at judging talent. I mean, because you had Tukuafu catching the touchdown. I mean, he's a 300-pound defensive lineman now playing fullback. We had Chase Kaufman, who is our fourth stringer, who had a great game. Coop was fantastic. Two guys from the line, right? Where it was Luke and J.R. Sweezy out. Oh, and Okung. So So two of our linemen were out. Bailey and Glowinski filled in great, so you really got a sense of how good John and Pete are at judging how.
Yeah.
And then C. Mike, which maybe they were right all along.
C. Mike may end up being such a good story. And Pete Carroll, the way he talks about it, I think he's believing.
He wants that story.
Yeah.
Pete loves the story.
Yeah.
That is true. Yeah. Pete does.
Which is why we'll see Sark.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. I think that you're talking about something that we never really hear talked about. We judge organizations based on talent acquisition, whether it be draft or free agency or trades, right? We don't talk about coaches and franchises' abilities to develop players. We have this kind of idea that by the time they reach the NFL, they are what they are, and it's just a matter of getting used to the speed and that kind of thing, right? But what Pete Carroll has shown that he and his staff can do over and over and over again, year in and year out, is develop the talent that they have. And maybe you don't bench a guy for his weaknesses.
Yeah.
Maybe you figure out, okay, we can run a few packages where we take advantage of his strengths and save him from his weaknesses, right?
And they do a great job of saving you from your weaknesses. That's
big thing.
A phenomenal way of putting it.
Think about Brandon Browner, right? Brandon Browner might be the worst cornerback in the NFL. I mean, he gives up the most yards, he gives up the most penalties, he gives up the most touchdowns.
Right.
Okay? He's probably the worst. And at least this year. And he was a Pro Bowler because, he can't stay with a double move. Never has, probably never will. And he gets real grabby after 10, 15 yards. But they just rolled people over the top of him and let him, you take care of 15 yards and in. And just pass them off, right? We're not going to worry about the stuff that you're bad at. We will tweak the defense, take advantage of how good you are inside of 15 yards. That kind of thing is, and it was the Browner example that I first started kind of take notice of this in Pete Carroll, is that, is Bruce Irvin the best overall defensive end in the draft? Right. Of course not. He was 240 pounds in college. But they didn't draft him to be J.J. Watt. They drafted him for specific packages because they had a lot of talent at that position. And so they don't put Bruce Irvin in positions where, his size or lack thereof is taken advantage of by a 320-pound guy. They keep him in space, let him do what he's phenomenal at.
Being one of the best athletes on the team.
Right. Which is really saying something with this roster.
Exactly.
So, I think that, it's something that just deserves a little bit more credit than it gets, is Pete Carroll, and and Win Forever, he talks about coaching his coaches, right? There should be some credit for the fact that he is coaching his coaches how to coach the players in their positional growth.
It's such a phenomenal job. As you said, it's not just a talent evaluation, but bringing the whole thing and coaching the guys. And you can see with Doug Baldwin, who is now one of the best receivers around, and you're like, he was, just another undrafted guy, but it wasn't a talent thing as much, or there's obviously the talent there, but Pete's ability to pull it out. And now he's just goes with such precision and has perfect hands. He's brilliant.
He has been. I mean,
which then makes you think maybe people should shut the fuck up at the beginning of the year when things aren't going well.
I think that's
breathe a little bit.
Yes.
These guys have proven they know what they're doing.
We've had the same emotional roller coaster.
Oh my God, they're 2-4.
It feels like deja vu.
When are we collectively as a fan base going to learn to just hey, you don't have to palpitate for 2 days. It's all right. Take it easy on the blood pressure. Until they are bad for a season, let's give them benefit of the doubt.
Exactly.
Because they have been really, really good for a long time. And you're right, it's the same narrative arc. It's like they're making the Rocky movie over and over again.
It's serious.
Few different minor characters, different villains, but
we're gonna have some art on
and Rocky. November, December is that workout montage, right?
Right.
Where it's they're turning the corner and really getting serious for this fight.
Things are happening.
Yeah, Seahawks seasons are Rocky movies, and hopefully the Tommy Gunn one is a ways off still. But I think that what we're seeing is the true installment of a philosophy. You know, we talk about the Pete Carroll philosophy a lot. Danny and I on our Pick'em podcast talk a lot about teams having an identity and how important that is. When you think talent is kind of equal, if you have a team that you feel like they know who they are and what they do well, go with them. Yeah. And the Seahawks know who they are, know what they do well, and they're fortunate in that they do, well, not fortunate, it's by design, but they do a lot of different things well. You know, the final DVOA rankings came out today, and just quick primer, DVOA is not a perfect stat, but it's probably the best inclusive metric that we have so far. It's done by footballoutsiders.com. The idea is just to give a true or find a true value for a team play by play with regard to how good their opponent is, what the game situation is, things like that, right? Yeah. Not penalizing a quarterback for throwing it away instead of taking the sack, whereas a traditional passing metric would take it away for being an incompletion, that kind of thing. It's also highly, highly predictive from about week 10 on in the season and in the playoffs. So this is a little primer. The Seahawks just became the first team in NFL history to finish number 1 in DVOA overall 4 straight years. Yeah. So every year that Russell Wilson's been in the league. I saw
that tweet. How far back?
DVOA started in 1989. So this is the 27th or 26th season that we have on record, 27th season. So enough to have 27 times 32, right? Or 30 for half of it. So we're talking, you know, a lot. Over 500 seasons, and the Seahawks are number 1 again. And this is the first ever DVOA Bowl this week. Just so you know, this is the first time that a season finale has featured the number 1 versus number 2 teams. Arizona came in number 1, and Seattle unseated them. And whether they were going for that DVOA championship, they probably weren't, but they were going for that scoring defensive championship. Yeah. And they knew, you know, Richard Sherman talked about how they were watching the Bengals score to see if they could win their 4th straight, first team since the merger to win 4 straight defensive scoring titles. And when they saw that Cincinnati gave up 16, they knew that it had to be 7 or less. Yeah. And so it was so cool to hear Pete Carroll on Monday talk about how the sidelines and the defense were aware, like, hey, you can't give up any points here. But he still put the backups in. Yeah. So, like, this scoring crown is on the backups, and it looked like it was going to get away from him at the end. Deshaun Shedd gets the pick in the end zone, seals the deal. I mean, like, that was an unusual celebration on the sidelines. But my point is that part of the Pete Carroll philosophy is celebrating greatness and letting people know you can be great. More importantly, you can be part of something that is great. Right. And I want you to be a part of this. I want you up 30 to be cheering that the guys who have been making you better in practice all season long are going to get a chance to go out and get you another title. Yeah. You know, I think that stuff matters to the players a lot. And it's kudos to Carroll for doing it. You know, one of the tenets of John Wooden's success is give your backups meaningful minutes. And
he does just such a phenomenal job at that. Yeah, I think that's really it goes along what we were talking about with the development and everything else, that when it comes time then for the guys to move on, you know, Glowinski's going to be great here in a couple of years, or has the potential to really be great. You know, we've got those guys have gotten the good minutes to be able to stabilize when people move on instead of having the whole thing fall apart. Yeah. We ended up talking about a lot of different stuff.
I like that Glowinski gets to go against Mike Bennett and Cliff Averill and Frank Clark.
I still think the D-line's the best position group on this team.
Yeah. You know? I mean, it doesn't get a lot of fanfare as much because of the Legion of Boom and all that, but yeah, that was definitely really encouraging too, to see Glowinski do so well. Yeah. I mean, he didn't have like an amazing game, but for his first game against a strong defensive line, like, you got to be happy about that.
Yeah, it's been, you know, we haven't talked a whole lot about the defensive line on this show, and we're not going to, but they're worth.
They're awesome.
There we go. They're worth appreciating. And actually, I do want to talk about them later when we look ahead to the Vikings game. But up next, we're going to grab some refills, and I'm going to have Matt Nichols join me. And we're going to break down what we saw from the offensive line this week and what we can expect moving forward. So we'll catch you in a few. that. Joining me now is Matt Nichols. If you've been watching the show for any period of time, you're familiar with him, with his football acumen. If you're not, welcome to the show. He is a former all-conference offensive lineman at Pacific Lutheran University. He helped them win a national championship there and was part of some record-setting offenses. So we like to give him a little bit of time to break down what we see from the Seahawks offense and what we can expect moving forward. Last couple of weeks, he's been joined by a former teammate of his, Isaac Williams, who wishes he could be here for this segment. He's home with a couple of sick kids, but we hope to have him back next week. Matt, how you doing?
Great, Jackson. How you doing, bud?
Doing great, man.
Good.
Appreciate you being on.
Always.
What you and I were texting during the game, and you were pointing out a couple of things, and I just want to know what stood out to you the most, watching it as a former offensive lineman, really keying in. I know you go back and rewatch all of the games as well. What stood out to you the first time you watched the game, and then what stood out to you more when you rewatched?
So the thing that stood out to me right away was looking at the Arizona Cardinals defense. Structurally, what they do is they're all over the board. The Seahawks are going to sit in their base 4-3 defense. They're going to run cover 1, cover 3, and they're going to play just what they do, and they're not going to change. Arizona runs everything across the board, from quarters to cover 1 to cover 3 to cover 0, which means no safeties deep. They're running man, they're running zone. They're just doing everything. Also take that and look back a week to St. Louis, and immediately you know that, and nobody has the defensive line and the athletes like St. Louis does.
Sure.
So this instantly, within the first drive, you knew was a better matchup for Seattle. And you saw it across the board. You saw Alvin Bailey making good blocks. Mark Lewinsky played a very good game. This is a guy that hasn't played a football game in a year.
Yeah.
Like, he has not played a football game in a year. And the conditioning aspect of that, can you imagine going out there for the first time in the NFL, playing your first game in which you're starting, having that adrenaline dump, because pretty much every player is going to have that, and then playing a very, very good game against Calais Campbell and a very aggressive defense, and a defense that does so many unique things that you have to be on top of it. So after that first drive, I was sitting there going, wow, they have a great game plan in place. Their blocking is very good so far. Let's see if we can keep this momentum going, because it was an 88-yard touchdown drive on the first drive of the game. So they came out and they just looked solid. As I continued to watch the game, you know, that game got out of hand really quick. That game was over at halftime, for all intents and purposes. So you could see what they were doing. You could see them flying around. You could see them just really executing and not doing some of the same mistakes that they had the previous week, which is a good thing. This is one of those games, and I don't know if I texted you this during the game or if it was after. I thought this was the best game they have played from start to finish, offense, defense, and special teams, since the Super Bowl victory over Denver. So going back through all the games they played last year, all the games they played this year going up, I thought this was hands down their best game that they played, because there was nothing that they couldn't do, and that there was nothing that Arizona could do to them. And Arizona's a freaking damn good team coming into this. I mean, we've sat here and talked about that we think that Arizona's probably the best team in the NFL.
I think so.
And how explosive, how explosive their offense is, how very solid their defense is, how they have a coach who has some major huevos and will do whatever it takes. That was just a flat-out butt-kicking by the Hawks. The other thing that really stood out was the yardage that Tyler Lockett provided for them, whether it's on the punt returns or the fear of the punt return or on his catches. This third-round wide receiver is a Pro Bowler as a returner. He is possibly going to be a Pro Bowler as a wide receiver. He is so electric, and he is. Danny and I were just talking about. He is what the Hawks had kind of hoped Percy Harvin would be, only for a lot less of a salary and a lot better locker room person. So there was so much that was positive about this game, and then there's kind of that we're in playoff mode now. Yeah. It's exciting. Let's go forward and throw all the chips on the table and see where it comes out.
It's interesting you mentioned Lockett, and this is something that I wanted to point out in that first segment. We just didn't get a chance to get to it. You know, they talk about becoming an NFL wide receiver. Like, a really good one is a 3-year process, right? Don't judge a wide receiver until year 3. Perhaps the best example we saw of that was Golden Tate.
Absolutely.
Doug Baldwin about a year behind him. And unless you are a prototype Julio Jones, Odell Beckham Jr. type of player, you don't really see that first-year impact very often. Last year's draft class kind of spoiled everything, right? But really, rookie wide receivers very rarely put up really big numbers. When targeting Tyler Lockett, Russell Wilson completed 74% of his passes this year. That's the 4th best number in the NFL. And this isn't a big dude that they're just running, the big Mike Williams stick route at 8 yards where you can get a high completion percentage, so you just take advantage of his size and whatever. This is a little dude. He's 180 pounds. And he's like tuning up some cornerbacks.
Yeah.
And making contested catches. I mean, how many times in the last month have we seen him get clobbered while he's catching the ball and hang on to it? Or when he's catching a ball with a defender's arm draped across his arms, we're talking about a potentially truly special player.
Well, in 2 of those plays that I'm just thinking back to the recent games, 2 of those plays have been catches on the sidelines in which the safety has come over and blasted him. He's held onto the ball, and they've gotten a 15-yard penalty on the defense. So he's gotten an extra 30 yards just because of the hits that the safeties have put on him. This is one of those players that is going to be fun for years to watch and to watch him grow. He's one of those special athletes. He comes from an NFL pedigree. He seems, from everything you hear from teammates, from everybody, he is a good person who works really, really hard at his craft. And so he's doing very well on the screens, very well in the deep routes. The crossing routes are going to be there. What weapons he brings to the game is only going to go up from here. And that for a defense is scary as hell.
It took the Cardinals 29 minutes to gain more offensive yards than Tyler Lockett had punt return yards.
Yeah.
Like this is crazy on 4 punt returns, and really it should have been 5 for another 40 or 50, whatever it was. But he had 139 yards, and that's impressive to get that many return yards in a game, much less a half. But it also speaks to how well the Seahawks defense played, and we talk with you a lot about the Seahawks offense and what they try to do. But there's 2 sides to that coin, right? So there's a chance Seattle plays Arizona again. What was Arizona's line doing, and was it different than what they were so successful with in their first game, or did the Seahawks make some adjustments to it?
No, Seattle just played a better game. They executed better. They didn't shoot themselves in the foot. They didn't get the false starts that knocked them back to 1st and 15. They just had they have this really good rhythm going. And we always talked about at college the 60-30-10 rule. 60% of the times when you lose, you just beat yourself. Like, it's just you have the dumb stuff that kills you, the turnovers, the penalties, the mental mistakes. 30% of the time it's because the other team's just flat better than you. And then 10% of that is momentum. And Seattle has momentum going on its side right now. Arizona had momentum coming into this game. Make no doubt about it. All of these, I don't say excuses because players don't make excuses. It's fan bases that make excuses, or media that makes excuses. Arizona had a lot to be playing for, especially in that first half, because at that point Carolina was up a touchdown or 2. They had home field advantage to be playing for. They had the opportunity to take the Seahawks have been the alpha of that division and knock them down a peg going into the playoffs. They had everything to be playing for, and they didn't do that. The flip side of that is the Seattle had everything within themselves, and going back to being 1-0 for the week, being a champion for the week. This is why you don't get up for certain games, because if you have to get up for certain games, that means the natural reaction is to go down for other games. This was classic Pete Carroll, Seahawks football, just doing what they do, and who cares what the other team does. Jeremy Lane had a great interception. Could have had another one. Deshaun Shedd made an unbelievable pass bat down of that. They just played solidly. There were not missed tackles in the game. There didn't look like there was blown assignments. And again, the ability to have Jeremy Lane out there along with Deshaun Shedd allows them to do things with Richard Sherman that weren't possible earlier in the game, or earlier in the season. So they could keep Sherman on the side, which they didn't do at 100% this time. Sherman flipped sides a little bit. But structurally, with that defense, with guys that know it, with guys that know that system, They're going to run cover 1. They're going to run cover 3. They're going to blitz a little bit, but not a ton. And they just played Seahawks football. We also need to talk about the D-line and how good our defensive line played.
Yeah, I would really like to hear you.
Because Cliff, Mike, Frank, Cassius Marsh in there. I mean, all of those guys played. Mebane played
Can
really
I
well.
Step in for 1 second, just because I'll forget to say it. I'm so sorry.
No.
Cassius Marsh made a tackle on a punt coverage inside the 10-yard line. I have never in my life seen a defensive end make a tackle inside the 10-yard line on punt coverage.
Yeah.
That's all I got. Continue.
Yeah. No, the first play of the game, Carson Palmer gets whacked. And that was a theme throughout the game. When he was dropping back, he was getting whacked. And that's something that Seattle needs to be able to do. They didn't do it against St. Louis because St. Louis ran 3-step drops, and that's not going to happen against 3-step drops. You're not going to get there. As a defensive lineman, you really need to, at the 3-step drop, is basically stop your path and jump up to try to knock the ball down. With 5- and 7-step drops, there's enough time for Seattle's defenders to get there. With the nightmare matchups that we're seeing Frank Clark starting to elevate his game, having Jordan Hill back was another big thing. This team has so much talent in that defensive line group. And I know in the first segment you had talked about you still think it's the most talented group
I do.
Of the Seahawks roster. They have so much talent that the games that they can play are really a nightmare matchup.
You know, it's interesting. The Cardinals came into that game ranked 6th in the NFL in rushing. You know, we talk about the Seahawks defensive line. We typically talk about it in terms of pressuring the quarterback. But by holding the Cardinals, like I said, number 6 team in rushing. They had the second leading rusher in the NFL, and Chris Johnson. Placed him with David Johnson, who's kicking everybody's butt.
Yeah.
They held him 27 yards. By doing so, they won Pete Carroll's first NFL rushing defense title. This team led the NFL in rush defense. That is spectacular stuff from a team where you think about them as being the dominant pass defense. I mean, the guys, you know, Ida Rubin, Jordan Hill, those guys are just clogging things up.
Well, and one of the things that people don't realize how good Ataba Rubin is in that role. And Mebane and Rubin do a phenomenal job of taking on 2 blockers. And when a defensive tackle can take on 2 offensive linemen, it allows the linebackers to run free. And with the speed of our linebackers and as good of tacklers as they are, it is really hard for the other team to get running, as the stats have shown out this year. But Ataba Rubin has been a phenomenal pickup for them. And you go back to the Branch and the Kevin Williams and the Tony McDaniels, and they've always had good players there. They've found guys that have come in for a year or two and have been very serviceable and good in that position. Ataba Rubin's taken it up to the next level. Plus, the guy's running guys down on screen passes 25 yards down the field versus Cleveland. I mean, holy crap! That's not something that you can coach a guy to do. That's all want to and sheer willpower. And for all of the conversations we had on these couches 8 weeks ago about what's wrong with the Hawks, we always kept a level head and said, this team is so close, this team is so close, this team is so close.
They really were.
And
they really
we knew that.
We saw glimpses of this all season long.
That's exactly right. And the reality is we could be on these same couches a week from tonight and it could all be over.
Sure.
I mean, the playoffs are a bitch because it's one and done.
Yep.
And it could be over.
I'd take Seattle best of 3 against anybody.
Absolutely. Hell yeah. But one and done. It's one and done.
Yep.
So we have to really enjoy what's going on because, again, come Sunday afternoon, our Sunday dinner might suck. I mean, it just might taste like crap, and going to work Monday might just absolutely be the pits. And quite honestly, I possibly will call in sick Monday if that happens. But we have a really good team, and we have a really good shot. So let's enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just cherish these moments right now as a Seahawks fan.
Yeah.
There are a few plays that you and I have kind of talked about in the days since the game, and I know a few that really stood out to you. I know the viewers like if you kind of took us through that and some specifics on what you saw on some of the more successful plays.
Okay, so the first play we're going to talk about today, and it's just an absolutely great run by Kristen Michael on the first drive. So there's that bullcrap pass interference call on Tyler Lockett. which makes it a 2nd and 19. So Seattle does not come out and throw the ball on that. They run it with C-Mike. And Seattle comes out in a stack spreads look. So there's 2 receivers on each side, but as opposed to the receivers being lined up with space in between them, they're literally stacked on top of each other. Both sets of receivers are outside of the numbers, so they have widened the field dramatically. Seattle then has their 5 offensive linemen, Russell in the shotgun position, and C-Mike right next to him. Arizona, what Seattle is doing is they're dictating to Arizona what defenses they can run. Because if Arizona wants to play back, Seattle's going to throw the ball quickly to the back receiver, who's going to turn it upfield and get an easy 6 or 7 yards. So Arizona, in an attempt to stop that, is stacking 2 defenders on there. Well, when they put 2 defenders on the left and 2 defenders on the right, what that does is that creates only 7 men left to be in the box, or possibly be in the box. Arizona comes out in a 4-2 defensive alignment. So 4 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and Rashad Johnson, their safety, is 15 yards deep. At the snap, you can see Rashad absolutely flying up because this is a formation in which Seattle has run the zone read out of a lot. So he is taking the wide side of the field, or to the viewer, the left side of the field, and he is taking the Russell Wilson read option aspect out of it. Gary Gilliam absolutely manhandles his guy on the right side and knocks him down. If you watch the TV replay, you can how Isaac talked about a couple of weeks ago, running backs need to run off of their offensive lineman's butt. There is literally C-Mike running off of Gary Gilliam's butt. I mean, there's no space in between him. Glowinski gets a nice stalemate there. Patrick Lewis cuts off the linebacker on the play side. Justin Britt, the guy fights across Justin Britt's face, but because C-Mike is so fast, he's able to get away from him. Bailey cuts off the backside linebacker. They don't even block the backside defensive end because there's no way that guy's athletic enough to chase down C-Mike. Could that backside end of the Rams catch him? Absolutely. Have we seen that over and over ever? Hell yeah, it happened on the overtime game in the first game of the year when they chased down Marshawn Lynch on the 4th and 1. But there are very few people in the world that can do that. Right. The Rams just have a collection of them. So they don't even have to block him. They don't have to block that Rashad Johnson block coming on the end. So let's go out to the outside receivers. Cooper Helfet does what's called an outside release. So the ball's to his left, Cooper's to the right side. He releases outside of the DB towards the sidelines. What that does is that takes the cornerback's head and turns it away from where the ball is being run, and Cooper just starts running down the field. That cornerback has no clue that it's a running play.
Best block he ever threw.
Exactly, until it's 12 or 13 yards down the field. The guy that was up jamming, the DB of the 2 that was up close is totally out of the play because of alignment. On the backside, it doesn't matter. It's completely away. That play is a schematic thing that they have done on tape, that formation, and Troy Aikman in the broadcast said he's only seen Seattle run out of it. Since we're Seahawks fans, we watch a lot more games of Troy Aikman. They have passed out of that formation, but they are very run-heavy in that formation because it does spread the field so wide and it creates matchup nightmares. It was an absolutely beautiful run by C-Mike. You could see him cover the ball with 2 hands on a couple of different occasions.
He looked good.
It was absolutely a beautifully designed play, and on the 2nd and 19, that play they're looking to get 5, 6, 7 yards at best. Like if they can do that, they're sitting in a really good spot for 3rd down. You bust that bad boy for as long as C-Mike did. You're sitting in a whole new situation.
Totally.
And it's completely deflating to a defense.
Sure.
If you have a team in 2nd and long or 3rd and long and you give it up, that is one of those kick in the nuts like, oh, are you freaking kidding me? We had him.
Yeah.
It was an absolutely beautiful play by C-Mike.
Another play you were telling me about is the one to Curse, and I know you got really excited about this one, so tell me why.
Yeah, so, again, Alvin Bailey's been much maligned as the Seahawk offensive lineman. Last year, Pete Carroll makes comments about his weight. He comes in this year possibly going to be our starting left guard. That gets scrapped. He's not been somebody that Seahawk fans have looked very highly of. Please, and we're going to put the clip in it in this video, please watch it. Alvin Bailey decleats a guy in pass protection. And I think
no one does that.
No one does that ever. Like, that's Orlando Pace, Walter Jones mythology type stuff. Like, that's stuff that you never frickin' see. So the play is really cool. So Seattle comes out and
did you catch that the first time you watched
it? I did.
Yeah.
I did. And literally I started I was more giddy about that than I was about the touchdown itself. It is the damn coolest thing. So they come out in 11 personnel. So they have one running back. Chase Kaufman's their tight end. They have over to the right. They have Kaufman as their far wide receiver, and then I believe it's Baldwin and Lockett, and it is Baldwin and Lockett on the inside. So they motion Kaufman in, and let me take a step back. So before the ball is snapped, Russell goes up to the line and is either changing protection or he sees something that he wants, and he gets so freaking excited when he goes back to take the shotgun snap. Like, he's calling for it now. Like, he is more amped up because at that point he knows exactly where he's going, and he knows if he makes the right pass and Jermaine beats his guy, it's a touchdown, and that game's over. It's 30-6 at that point. That game's over. You can see how excited Russell gets. So let's go back.
What was the term you used?
Well, I don't know.
Podcast?
I don't even remember. What did I use? What did I use?
Literally see Russell get a hard on before the
probably play. I probably said that. I won't deny that. And there's sometimes where you see a defense do something that you've scouted for all week, and you've practiced over and over and over, and you're like, these suckers got no clue what's coming, and 6 seconds later you're in the end zone celebrating. This was one of those plays. So Chase Kaufman's out wide to the right. Lockett and Baldwin are there. They motion Kaufman in to run a drag route. The Arizona Cardinals come with a blitz. Their DN backs out in coverage, and I believe it's Frosty Rucker who goes around that Alvin Bailey absolutely stones. What Curse does is he beats Bethel, the cornerback, immediately, and Rashad Johnson is late getting over. The reason Rashad Johnson is late getting over, and the reason this play works, is with the 3 receivers to the right, when Russell gets the ball, he has a slight turn to the right, because oftentimes when it's a 3-by-1 set, quarterbacks are going to look to the 3 receiver side before they look to the 1 receiver side, simply for matchups. And so his slight turn over there and then come back quick to Curse, throw the ball on a dime, that play is over, and that game is over at that point. It was absolutely a beautifully thrown ball, an unbelievably perfect route by Curse. Kaufman runs a simple drag route. Lockett, I think it's like about a 12 or 14 yard in route, and Baldwin's just running straight up at the safety. And so because Baldwin's running at the safety, Russell turns his head there. That safety has to honor that. Who's caught more touchdown passes in the NFL in the last 5 weeks than Doug Baldwin? There ain't anybody on this planet Earth. So because of all of these little things, it leaves Jermaine over there on one-on-one. That safety has absolutely no chance in heck to get over. Bailey absolutely obliterates his guy. And please watch it because it's so freaking awesome. And that was another play that just got me giddy with excitement. The 2 touchdowns, so the touchdown to Tufuaku, the touchdown to Chase Kaufman, it's the same play. There's no difference. It's different personnel, but it's essentially the same play. So they're faking to the tailback, fullback leaks out. Minter, the linebacker for Arizona, on the first time doesn't recognize that it's a pass play. As soon as he is shoulder to shoulder with Tufuaku, the play's over. Ball's going to Tufuaku. It's done. Minter realizes that, flips his hip. It's over. Touchdown Tufuaku. This play, he realizes it, bails out on that on Derek Coleman this time as the fullback. Kevin Smith runs a deep drag route. Chase Kaufman looks like he's going to block for a little bit, pulls out. Backside receiver just runs to the fullback side of the field. Kevin Smith gets an absolutely great shot on Patrick Peterson right as Kaufman's going into the end zone. Touchdown. So, I mean, think about it. Bryce Brown, Will Tufuaku, Chase Kaufman, Jermaine Curse. 4 touchdowns in that game. How many of them were drafted by the Seahawks? None. None.
That's amazing.
Unbelievable.
That is
absolutely unbelievable what that team did on Sunday. That's some of the best football I have ever seen on a professional level.
That is
unbelievably good.
That's crazy. One thing I did want to ask you about, you got me very, very concerned last week. Mm-hmm. You were talking about the effect of being down to Cooper Helfett at tight end, right? This guy, he's what you call a package player, right? Mm-hmm. He runs certain packages, take advantage of what he's good at, leave him off the field for the rest. Well, now he's got to do it all, right? What did you see, I mean, aside from not having to block Aaron Donald, what did you see from Cooper Helfett and also from Chase Kaufman aside from the touchdown? Was it just a stripped-down playbook, or did Kaufman and Helfett show that they can handle the responsibilities necessary to run their offense.
Yeah, so when we talked last week about stripped down playbook, again, that is having your second tight end all of a sudden, or essentially your third tight end, all of a sudden have to become your first tight end. With a week of game planning and preparation for him, he knows exactly what his role is going to be. And Bevel created an unbelievably perfect game plan for that game. They did some things with the tight ends, which they always do. They even used Tufuaku out at fullback or out at tight end a couple of times, where they're lining him up and then they're lining him in a wing position or a tight end position, and then bringing him back across the grain for those cutback blocks that we've seen Luke Wilson do. We saw Zach Miller do those in previous years. It's a staple of their offense. They weren't asking Cooper to do that over and over and over. They were asking Cooper that when they were faking a run to the left side, so after the Kristen Michael run, they fake the run to the left side and Cooper drags back behind the line of scrimmage. Russell throws him the ball and he runs it all the way up to like the 1 or 2 yard line.
Yeah.
Right before the Russell Wilson slide for the touchdown, the Bryce Brown touchdown, all of that. That was actually, I believe, also the second play of the game, some variation of it. So we talk about concepts, and we've talked about that a lot. And so this is another one of the concepts where the Seahawks will bring that receiver back across the grain behind the line of scrimmage, behind all the offensive linemen, to try to get all of those DBs and linebackers in some sort of confusion, leak that guy out, get him the ball, and it should be an easy 2 or 3. And if they do stone each other on the defensive side, it's 12 yards.
Sure.
So they've done that concept over and over, and they used Cooper in that very well. Chases a little bit bigger body. He's a very athletic tight end. They didn't put him in either of them in positions where they weren't able to flourish. And again, losing Luke Wilson against St. Louis is a lot different than losing Luke Wilson would have been versus any other team. Yeah. When we talk about how bad that was last week, again, we have to go back to the personnel matchups. And as styles make fights in boxing and in MMA, styles also make for matchups within football. And that's just a bad matchup for us.
Sure.
This is more of what we're going to see going forward in the playoffs. So if you look at the defense for Arizona, we have a very legitimate chance of seeing them again. Carolina is going to run a base 4-3 defense. They don't have the most athletic defensive line like St. Louis does. So it allows Seattle to do more of that zone blocking movement, because again, movement for their zone blocking is key. And when the defensive linemen don't move as well as St. Louis, Seattle has a really good chance to run the ball. So I was very, very happy with the tight end play. I know I said this right when we started, but again, Mark Lewinsky played a very good game. Patrick Lewis played a good game. Justin Britt played good. They all played well. This was just a very, very well-played football game. And something that you can hang your hat on going into the playoffs now versus Minnesota here in 5 days.
That's awesome. And we're going to take a quick break and grab another glass, go pee, and we'll be back and we'll look forward to that Minnesota game and hopefully the playoffs beyond that. So give you a chance to hit the restroom as well, and we'll catch you in a few. All right, we're back, and we got the whole gang here for the final segment. Before we get into what's ahead of this team in terms of the playoffs, first round, and potentially beyond, we would be doing disservice if we did not close the book on the regular season. In what was a tumultuous regular season, I think a season more laden with expectations than anything we've ever experienced, probably literally as Seattle sports fans before. The kind of specter of the Super Bowl and all of that. So, Brent, I want to start with you. When you think back on the last 16 games, what really sticks out about this team this season?
Well, I think the coaching, actually, more than anything, was how good of a job Pete did. I mean, it was brought up finally discussing, I think, at the press conference on Monday.
Yeah.
Yes, there was a hangover. Nobody wanted to acknowledge the Super Bowl hangover. Obviously, he did. Obviously, Darryl Bevell did, with having fun at that first play. And that I think Pete just did such a phenomenal job keeping things from completely sliding off the rails 2 and 4. Even more so last year because it was. Than last year because it was really fallen, and having that once we hit that break, they had a meeting, the coaches and Russ, and they were able to figure out how to get the pace going a bit better, figure out how to work with the offensive line that was given to them, and turn the team from a team that was floundering into somebody that was just the best team in football. That was I was really impressed with what Pete's done this year, and he's not going to win Coach of the Year again, but he's just so damn good, and that's the biggest thing I pulled away from it, I think.
Yeah, it's amazing too because we're talking about them playing as the hottest team in football, playing the best football in the league right now, and I think you'd have a hard time saying anyone's played their last 8 games better, last 10 games better than the Seahawks have. But down this final stretch, and we talked about DVOA earlier, arguably the highest predictor of playoff success is weighted DVOA, which puts more emphasis on your recent performance. The Seahawks are entering the playoffs with the 3rd highest weighted DVOA of all time. They did that without Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah.
They did that without Cam Chancellor. They've done it without Russell Okung. I mean, we're talking about like Pro Bowl, All-Pro level. Jimmy Graham.
Right. He's an
Thomas
Rawls.
Rawls, who was leading the NFL in yards per carry. This is, every coach talks about next man up, but what stands out to me so much about this team is that with all of the struggles and all of the deficiencies, and it took longer than it has in seasons past to figure it out. Sure enough, come November, from All Saints Day on, this team really, really rolls. And if they do it this year, if they do it this year, it has got to be, I imagine, the most satisfying thing in Pete Carroll's career, because just the weight that they've carried this season.
Yeah. Well, you're seeing kind of a John Wooden, who Pete idolizes, type of dynasty that's being really built up, and something that's going to be, hopefully we'll get to take for granted years to come. But this is really something special that, as my kids grow up, we can kind of reflect on this period of time where the Seahawks were just so good for an extended period of time. It's amazing. It's so much fun to watch.
Yeah. And all of these little things, it's the accumulation of a whole bunch of little things that make a big deal at the end. The acquisition of Kelsey McRae. Did you ever think that was important?
Jeez.
How freaking good has that pickup been? Or going back and getting C-Mike, or all of
cutting
these,
Kerry,
cutting Kerry Williams. All of these little things that have made a huge effect on the end product. Is really a testament to the program that Pete has put into place and the execution by everybody from the front office all the way down to the ball boys on every single level, because they're all doing exactly what Pete wants them to do.
Yeah, and I think that we're going to get Marshawn back.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Marshawn would not. I know it's this afterthought that Marshawn would not fit on most other teams because of his personality, but on this team, fine. Yeah. Marshawn can go ahead and get ready in San Francisco with MMA guys. Fine, whatever. If that's going to be what it takes, then that's what it takes. And then on Sunday, hopefully he's going to come back, and we're going to go, oh my God.
I was watching some old runs by Lynch today, actually, and I'm just like, oh yeah. Forgot about how hard he runs.
Yeah. Really freaking
it's
good.
Crazy.
He's and who was it? I want to. Man, someone was telling me. I'm so sorry for not getting this because I thought it was the perfect reference. Marshawn Lynch is Allen Iverson, right? Where
talk about practice.
Was that you? That wasn't you. This idea that like all the stuff that matters to us as fans about what we expect from an athlete, and really what coaches expect from an athlete and from teams, right? Yeah. Is Marshawn is not that. If it's not football in time, like actual gameplay time, Marshawn's going to Marshawn.
Yeah.
But when it is game time, Marshawn is going to Marshawn. Yeah. And that's something that's really cool. You know, no one ever sweated whether Allen Iverson was going to give you everything he had on the field. Yeah. And for all of the shenanigans you hear about with Lynch, he brings it. I mean, he straps up and he brings it.
Do you remember the Deion Sanders interview at the first Super Bowl?
Yeah.
By far, actually, literally, I think the best athlete interview of all time.
Yeah.
Well,
but he's like, I'll be there. My teammates know I'll be there.
Yeah. And that's the huge thing about it is he never takes away from the team with him doing that. He never brings dishonor or disgrace to the team because that's a huge tenet in Pete Carroll's philosophy of taking away from the team. He protects the team, but he is in Marshawn's own world. But when it's time, you're like, dude, this guy's got my back more than as much as anybody in the
plays. He can handle every responsibility.
Yeah. It's not like he's effing up, but like things.
Yeah. And we're about to play the Hawks are about to play in potentially negative 10 degree weather.
Yeah.
And there's nobody I'd rather have in the backfield.
Right.
Because they're going to have to run it, and both teams are going to really have to focus on that run.
I do want to get to that because I think that's a huge issue in this game. But I insist on, before we get in there, just from a number standpoint, and Danny, I want you to speak on this for a little bit. Some of the things that this team accomplished, I'll list off a few, but I want to hand this off to you. Like we mentioned, they led the NFL in yards allowed rushing. They rushed for over 2,000 yards for the fourth straight season. Yeah. They almost outrushed their opponents by 1,000 yards. They outrushed their opponents by 968 yards this year. Last year was like 1,400 yards. I mean, these are crazy things. 4 straight years leading the NFL in points allowed. They had as many interceptions than touchdown passes allowed this year. Not 14-14.
Yeah, I saw that actually.
They gave up 14 touchdown passes all season. For all of our worries about the secondary, they gave up less than a touchdown pass a game when the NFL literally set a record with over 800 touchdown passes this year. And they gave up 14 of them. You're supposed to give up almost 30 of them.
Right.
And so, there's all that. And then, of course, on offense, all the success that they had. And the catalyst for that, obviously, is Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
And you were just saying a few things before we came back on air about just from a sheer numbers standpoint what he's accomplished this year.
Yeah, so obviously he set the Seahawks record for touchdown passes. I think he had 34 this year. Actually, I was looking at this the other day. There were, to your point about touchdown passes, there were more touchdown passes this year than any other year in history. There were 11 quarterbacks that had 30 or more touchdowns, and that also is, you're taking away Andrew Luck, who didn't play hardly at all. A couple other guys.
Manning wasn't around.
There was one other guy that got injured.
Tony
Romo, and there's even one more. So anyway, the point is there's 11 guys, plus there probably should have been like 4 or 5 more. Last year it was 9. The year before that and the year before that it was 5 each year. So it's like, it's like skyrocketing.
Yeah.
And that just points to the idea, like 14 touchdowns all year. That is insane. Mm-hmm. But to Russell Wilson, 34 touchdowns, 8 picks. He set the Seahawks record for touchdown passes. He set the Seahawks record for yards.
Year after setting the Seahawks record for rushing yards by a quarterback, and like the 3rd highest total ever. Right.
He's the only quarterback in NFL history that passed for 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, and rushed for 500 yards. Only quarterback in history. He had 110 passer rating, which I think is like 13th or 15th. We can't remember. So we'll write that in the post. Whatever, regardless, one of the best passer rating seasons of all time. He was 118 passer rating from the pocket, which Sheil Kapadia wrote today or yesterday at ESPN, which is best in 3 years.
The best number in 3 years. And how many times have we heard the critics of Russell Wilson say the way to beat him is just keep him in the pocket? If you can
That's
keep
what
him
teams still do.
From running around and doing his backyard schoolboy stuff, we can beat him.
Yeah.
He is the best pocket passer statistically in the NFL.
Right.
And then remember, up till the bye week, there was calls for fire Bevel, and the offense wasn't clicking. So how much of this has been done in the second half? It's not like one full 16-game stretch of pure dominance.
I mean, he was like outside of luck, he was like the fantasy football quarterback bust this year, right? Yeah. Like, when are they going to start scoring touchdowns? And where's his 800 yards rushing? And yada yada. 7 games. Untouchable. I mean,
he had 24 touchdowns and 1 interception in the last 7 games. Kenneth was writing about this on Twitter. Credit him. I think only one quarterback, I think it might have been Rodgers, I can't remember, has had a better final half of the season than that, and that's only 7 games. Yep. Of course, his 8th game was a terrible game, but we don't have to talk about that. So, yeah, obviously the second half was amazing. I think this, to your point, like, the change from the first half of the year to the second half of the year is a perfect example of why play calling and execution are inextricably linked.
Yes.
You cannot separate. I mean, obviously there are stupid play calls, but you can, like, one-offs or two-offs, but you cannot separate the two. You know, just because. And so, like, I think actually Bevel's demonstrated brilliance in the second half of the year. You know,
what was brought up, I was listening to KJR today, I think it was, or it might have been a podcast from yesterday, talking to, I think it was Hugh Millen, and that at the break they got together, the coaches and Ross, and said, okay, things are working in that 2-minute type offense. We need to be able to do it all the time while you're still going in the huddles. That's why, as we've talked about before, him coming out with 15 seconds still, because he likes to keep that pace. And how big of a deal that was. And then the other is just running the playbook so that he can get rid of the ball just a titch quicker. And in doing that in the play calls, all of a sudden he looks like he's the most brilliant quarterback around when the play calls shifted ever so slightly from the beginning that allowed him to really flourish.
And they adapted some things.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to just bring up something that I've noticed. Every time they show Darrell Bevell on the sideline, so it's after Seahawks have a big play, then they show offensive coordinator Darrell Bevell, and they put all the things. He's got his hat on, he's got his play sheet. His lips are always not moving, and there's like 27 seconds on the play clock because he already has it in to Russ. Like, that's when they're humming.
That's cool.
It's in and done. Like, he's not talking, and he's looking at his thing and starting to mark off the previous play or whatever notes he has. Like, it's already in there. The personnel group is in there.
With the way they're executing, he's like 3 plays ahead probably.
Absolutely.
Because he doesn't have to worry. They're just executing.
That's exactly right. And you could see, and I can't remember, unfortunately, what play it was on the sidelines, but you see Pat McPherson, their tight end coach. The second the guy from the Seahawks goes out of bounds, he's signaling what personnel group to go in immediately. The play is
This is the kind of stuff you never talk about.
No,
this is awesome.
Yeah, you never see. There's no hesitation to what play's coming in. Let me figure it out. He's already a play or 2 or 3 ahead, and their personnel groups are ready to go in, which allows them to take advantage of if a defense is not getting the right personnel group to get it off faster.
Yes,
or if it is
Russell Wilson black enough?
I think it's all Sierra's fault. It's all Sierra's fault.
No,
I want to say before we stop with that, though, I really do think that Bevell has been really, really brilliant in the second half of the year. There's been a lot of plays where I'm like, wow, that was really cool. Like, what they did, just schematically, like, they just duped the fuck out of the defense. But I will say, I think Russell Wilson has played a lot better. It's both. He's suddenly become way more confident. He's trusting his pocket. You know,
because he has a pocket.
But he has a pocket, and he doesn't have to have quite as much time in the pocket.
He has left good pockets in the past, though.
Absolutely.
So I think he's we've talked about it. Like, he's finally actually doing it consistently. You know, stepping out,
which makes him holy shit good. I mean, just like if you're one of the other fans of one of the other teams, he's to that point where you can just look at and go, wow, that's a maestro. Where he's so brilliant in
honestly,
how he's executing.
The only quarterback who is in even the same sphere as a running threat as Russell Wilson with that command of the pocket that I've ever seen is Aaron Rodgers. And probably Steve Young, but I'm too young to actually appreciate that.
Right.
Yeah. You think about the great running quarterbacks. You think about the great running quarterbacks of all time, and Randall Cunningham had a couple great years with that crazy Vikings offense with Randy Moss and Chris Carter and Robert Smith for a few years. But for the most part, the great running quarterbacks they're great running quarterbacks because they run a lot.
But I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is the brilliance of what we're seeing right now, is that you're taking Joe Montana and Steve Young and putting them together.
Right.
What the fuck?
They're both Hall of Famers.
Well, that's as big and brilliant as you can get.
And over the last 7 weeks, what hasn't this offense done? It's run zone read. It's run power. It's gone 5 wides.
Good luck game planning.
It's thrown intermediate. It's thrown quick screens. It has done everything, and there's so many layers to it. One of the things we always talked about in college was putting stuff on film for the other teams to have to worry about. They put Tyler Lockett in the backfield this game, so that's one more thing. A fullback pass to Will Tufuaku, there's another thing. All of these things that Bevel and Pete and Tom Cable and the whole crew have done have just been brilliant, and they've all worked. And going forward, there's nothing in the playbook that they can't run or won't run,
and you can't
because it's all there.
You can't overstate how important that is.
Yes.
To have a defense, if a defense knows, perfect example. We saw in that first game against Minnesota, the Seahawks committed hard to taking away Adrian Peterson. And we'll go one man less deep. We will stack against your best and make Teddy Bridgewater and your receivers beat us, right? You can't do that to the Seahawks right now. I think you could early in the year. I really do. If the running game got off schedule, if you could force them in a second long, third and long, the offense really struggling. But what you're saying is so right. Besides the psychological advantage of playing really well, just the schematic advantage that you get from having 40 pages to choose from instead of 18 pages to choose from, I think goes a really long way, and it's going to make it so difficult for any team. And honestly, if they were to make the run, the 3 teams they're most likely to play are the 3 teams they've played already, right? But this is not the same team that played Carolina the first time, right? It's really even Green Bay, right? This is not the same team that played Green Bay. We saw what they were against the Cardinals, and I think it is the same team that played Minnesota. So I think what all 3 of you guys are saying is something that's really important, and just for as divisive for whatever reason as Darrell Bevell has been, even if you hate him, just appreciate what you've seen the last half of this season, because it is maestro level offense.
It's absolutely.
I love watching them work together. I think they have I actually now fear the idea of him leaving, because I think
absolutely
they've really developed a really strong relationship. In terms of they're on the same page. It's they don't need, like you said, they're getting the call in. He's getting the call in almost immediately. And so I don't know. I mean, obviously, I think Russell Wilson will be fine if he leaves, but now they're clicking.
Absolutely, this is as good of an offense as we've seen in Seattle ever. It's deadly on all aspects.
I agree. Yep. To the point that this might be the best Seahawks offense we've ever seen. It's their highest DVOA finish in offense, number 2 overall. There's one stat from this season that when I was writing the article this week stood out to me, and I think we've been so spoiled with some crazy league-leading historic type stats and streaks that the Seahawks have been on, right? I mean, it's almost like passé how historic this team has been over the last 4 years. There's something this year that I hope I never forget. A 5'11" quarterback threw to the following 3 receivers: Doug Baldwin, Tyler Lockett, Jermaine Curse. Okay? Those receivers are 5'10", 5'10", 6'1". They're undrafted, 3rd round, undrafted. Quarterback, 3rd round. This season, Doug Baldwin's quarterback rating when targeted, number 1 in the NFL.
Unbelievable.
Tyler Lockett's quarterback rating when targeted, number 2 in the NFL. Jermaine Kearse when targeted, quarterback rating, number 4 in the NFL. 3 of the 4 most efficient wide receiver combinations are on the Seahawks, and they don't cost anything.
Yeah, right.
Number 3.
I don't know.
Gotta be Antonio Brown.
I would be shocked if it wasn't Antonio
or
Brown or Julio Jones.
Or Julio,
I mean, those two. And here's the thing, right? Can Doug Baldwin, Tyler Lockett, Jermaine Kearse be that efficient with 170 targets, 180 targets like those guys get? Who knows, right?
Right.
They'll never be asked.
They'll never be asked. And that's the beauty of it is that those 3 guys can split 250 targets, and you're basically getting Antonio Brown, Julio Jones level production over 250 targets instead of 150 or 107. I want to get to the Minnesota game, and we'll do that, but I had to point that out because, I've written about a lot of stats that have left me in awe of what this team is accomplishing. I don't know that there's been anything this team has accomplished that's more just astounding to me than 3 of the top 4 receivers in the NFL.
Well,
those guys.
If we do make it to the Super Bowl, you're no longer going to hear the pedestrian.
Oh,
you're not going to hear any of that crap.
You can't lead the NFL in receiving touchdowns.
It's a beautiful thing. Because you're looking at it, you could say it's undrafted free agent, but if you just stop and think, these are guys that nobody wanted at all.
Yeah.
God, Kearse couldn't. As a UW fan, he just kept dropping the goddamn ball. And what these guys have turned into is it's unbelievably cool, and something that we should all just be thankful for, because they have developed into such incredible receivers that even last year they were being called pedestrian, though they weren't. And now that's not even going to be a whisper in the wind.
Well, I mean, last year the Seahawks' leading receiver had 3 touchdowns, Doug Baldwin. I believe he had 14 this year.
Yep.
Which 10 over, a 4-game
This
stretch?
is too short of what... So Des Bryant, his season last year is a benchmark for me, because the Cowboys actually threw the ball around the same amount as what the Seahawks threw the ball last year. The Seahawks threw the ball a little bit more this year, so it's a little different. But last year, Des Bryant had 16 touchdowns and a ton of catches and a ton of yards, obviously. But, I mean, Doug Baldwin essentially put up a Des Bryant season.
And
can we just,
how many...
Think about that.
Yeah,
think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, really just...
Maybe not in yards and catches, but, based on, touchdowns.
How many of his touchdowns were red zone touchdowns? Because I know a lot of Dez's were. Dez is a guy where it's like, hey, throw the fade and give him a chance. It's 50-50 that he's going to get a touchdown on any fade route. He ain't getting touchdowns and fade routes to Doug Baldwin. These are scores from out there.
Right.
Score from anywhere on the field. And I think Pro Football Focus has only been tracking this since 2007, so we're talking about a 9-year sample size. Been a lot of slot receivers over 9 years.
Oh, right, yeah.
Right? 500 plus. He tied the record with Randall Cobb with 12 touchdowns from the slot this year. 12 from inside position is crazy. That's third down conversion stuff. That's not touchdown stuff from the slot.
Well, and just from a schematic thing, what that does when you have such a weapon on the slot is, if you're going to run zone, you're at an obvious disadvantage because of his shakes and his ability to get open versus a nickel corner or versus the linebackers in that underneath zone. Or if you're running man, do you then bring your number 1 or number 2 corner from an outside position, bring him into the slot, and then have to put your number 3 or number 4 corner outside, and then it just has created a matchup. What Doug is able to do across the field is just a nightmare matchup. And again, we don't have the tallest or the fastest or any of that, but we have guys that can play in different positions.
A whole bunch of
all over.
margins.
There's a whole bunch of guys that can fit every position on the field. You could line Lockett up in the slot or outside, Kearse in the slot or outside, Baldwin in the slot or outside. It doesn't matter with these guys because they all do what they do very well. And again, going back to Darryl, he puts them in a position to do the things that they do well and doesn't put him in. He doesn't run fades to Doug Baldwin in the end zone.
Not
You ever
anymore.
seen that?
Not anymore, at least.
Yeah.
It's setting yourself up to succeed. It's
yeah.
just the most simple idea. It's something you do as a parent.
Yeah.
And to see it run to perfection is so cool.
Well, and Pete always talks about
talk about Minnesota.
And Pete always talks about getting players to do what they do best and not worrying about what they can't do. That's exactly what Seattle has turned their offense into this year.
All right. We need to appease Brent on this. We should talk about the Vikings.
He's gonna go nuts on us.
Brent, would you like to talk about the Vikings?
It's going to be cold.
It's going to be cold. Yeah.
It's going to be an interesting game because it's going to be potentially upwards of ice bowl cold.
Yeah.
-10. I remember it was last year, a couple of years ago, they were talking about the same kind of cold, I think, for a Green Bay game. It ended up not being quite that cold, a balmy 5 or something like that. But it is going to be holy shit cold, and you're going to have a healthy Marshawn Lynch and a not healthy Adrian Peterson, who's got a sprained back. It is going to be, it's not going to be a barn burner by any stretch, but it has the makings for one hell of a good Seahawks.
It's interesting you say that, and it is going to be just asphalt cold.
Yeah.
But I think Danny and I were talking about this. They've got a field warmer, so they're saying about 50 degrees on the field.
Yeah, they did the whole field over now, so the field should be not totally rock hard.
Which matters for impact and being able to plant and go whatever. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be just freezing their testicles off in the game, and that contact isn't going to hurt. And this time, you're used to dealing with the pain of getting your hand pinched between two helmets, but when that happens at 10 degrees or negative 10 degrees or whatever, it's like breaking icicles, right? So it's going to be interesting because I think we saw when they when they played the first time against Minnesota, and here's the thing: we all said last week Minnesota is the team you wanted, right? That's
not necessarily disrespecting Minnesota. To me, it's
not
the matchup fits them.
And
they beat them by 31. Listen,
Washington.
all of the things that are the disadvantage to them.
Rodgers.
All of the things that are the disadvantage to the Seahawks this week, road game, 10 a.m. start, cold, whatever. They dealt with this a month ago and beat them by 31. So I'm not saying Minnesota won't be better or even that Seattle will play as well, but 31 points is a massive gap to close. But to your point about it being cold, and it may very well come down to who's feeling better between Marshawn Lynch and Adrian Peterson. It's kind of like send out your champion, Greek style, right? And right. So you've got that, and I actually think that this lends itself to Minnesota, not necessarily more than Seattle, but all things being equal, I think Seattle showed that they win this matchup. They match up well enough to win this. But Minnesota is a great running team. And I'm sure Adrian Peterson will be close to his best. He'll find it. He'll get cortisoned up. He'll do his thing. The Seahawks win this game easily if they can turn it into a passing game. Not only does Teddy Bridgewater lack some great receiving options, Stephon Diggs has been a nice revelation, but there's a reason this is one of the worst passing teams in the NFL.
Yeah.
On top of that, they allow the most pressures. 47% of Teddy Bridgewater's dropbacks.
Unbelievable.
That is
just an unbelievable.
For a fan base.
insane.
Or Frank
Cliff
Clark.
Averill has more QB pressures this year than J.J. Watt.
Really?
Wow.
29 to 28.
That's better than that.
So now J.J. Watt has finished a lot more of those pressures.
Right.
But in terms of throwing them off of their timing and all that. So as a Seahawks fan, I want this to be a passing game.
Of course.
Running game, those margins, those edges that Seattle has over Minnesota are much smaller. Matt, I want to hear what you were saying to us earlier about what the cold does to a ball and how that affects play calling.
Yeah, so my senior year at PLU, I moved to center, and we played our first round of the playoff was against Bethel in Minnesota, coincidentally, and it was 15 degrees, 12 degrees, something like that at kickoff. It was awful. But what happens with the ball is they get harder and they get slicker. So a couple of weeks ago, we had some snapping issues with Patrick Lewis and the ball going over the head of Russ and then the ball getting dribbled back. So as the game goes on, and again, with the NFL, I'm sure the balls will be warmed up at halftime and get as close back to normal as possible.
Right.
But a ball does become harder. It becomes slicker. It just becomes more difficult to grasp. So that's one of the things that they'll have to deal with.
Teddy has small hands.
Yep.
Which is
a huge thing.
Yeah.
Because as a center, I had small hands.
Yeah, and Russell, as we know, has enormous large hands.
And actually, the way I would hold a football.
We all saw that side cover with his hands.
The way I had to grip a ball in the cold weather made a difference.
Really?
Yeah, there's just a slight little tweak to it when I'd have to do my shotgun snaps, just so I felt like I had good pressure and felt the ball well.
Right.
But footing shouldn't be an issue because the grass will be warmer. Players getting cold. I always thought the hardest part of that game for me personally was one, getting adjusted to the climate. They're going out on Friday, which is a huge thing.
Yeah.
They're going to have a day and a half or 2 days to basically get used to that weather. We practiced in the parking lot of the Mall of America the night before the football game, and I was in travel pants and a t-shirt for that because I just needed to get acclimated to it, and that was awful. Like, that just flat sucked. There was nothing fun about that. Fun about yeah. You get into the game and everything just hurts a little bit more. You can't get warm. When you do finally get loosened up, you're feeling good, you're playing. Then you go into halftime, and sure enough, the locker room's just a little bit warmer than it normally ever is, so your body starts to get really loose and warm, and then you go back out and it's freaking freezing outside again. So there's all of these little things that you don't normally have to deal with, but they will. And quite honestly, they have every piece of equipment, so if they need a little bit longer cleat for in the grass, they'll have it. If they need extra hand warmers, they'll have it. You'll see guys in turtlenecks. I mean, you already see Richard Sherman with the thing over his mouth. They'll have every piece of equipment. It's just getting used to it where you don't think about it. That's the big thing. Don't think about it. When you get to the point where you're not thinking about it and you're just playing football, then it doesn't freaking matter if you're in it.
Well, I wonder too how much of it the guys who are going to be the most affected are the ones who are like Adrian Peterson, who are dealing with the sprain. So the healthier team, I think, is going to have an impact on that. Who's got the least amount of aches and pains? Obviously, we're into the playoffs. We're going to already be there, but that's going to play a big role. Is who has the least amount of pain going into it? Because the cold. Yeah. I mean, I'm far from an athlete. You might have picked up on that. But if it's 30 degrees outside, my back is killing me. Yeah. And I can't imagine what a guy where it's that cold, shots or whatever shots, that shit's going to hurt.
Yeah, and I think Minnesota's defense, we have to just acknowledge that they're going to be very different than what we saw.
Sure.
They're going to have Anthony Barr back, they're going to have Harrison back in the safety, and they're going to have possibly Linval Joseph, although that's kind of up in the air. So that's 3 players just on their defense, their defensive 11, and that changes the structure. Barr is a freaking phenomenal linebacker. I mean, I was reading some stats that was saying he was the highest rated outside linebacker, and KJ Wright was number 2 in the NFL this year.
Right.
He's really, really, really good.
Yeah.
So all of the things that Seattle that we saw with the scoreboard, the 38-7, if we go in with that mindset as fans, we'll probably surely be disappointed. Yeah. This is going to be a very close. I think this will be a closer game. It was a 14-0 game until Bridgewater threw that interception to Earl Thomas right before half. Right. If it's a 14-0 game, they can still pound the rock with Adrian Peterson and do it over and over and over. When it's a 21-0 game, Adrian Peterson's out of it as far as what they have to do to get back into it. So it's, again, that razor's edge of we need to, if we can get up and if we can stay up, we can make them play more of the style we want them to play. But again, this is going to be a fun game.
And how many times have we seen it, right? Where, like, take for example last year when on opening day the Seahawks went out and just destroyed the Packers, and everyone, Chris Collinsworth, crown them now, and all that stuff, right? In week 1. And you just assume the NFC Championship game, there's no way they're making up a 22-point difference. They might be close or whatever.
Right.
They kicked the Seahawks' butt that game. Yeah. They did. And the same thing, like you look at Seattle, they blow out the Broncos by 5 touchdowns in the Super Bowl, and they play week 3 the next year, and it goes to overtime. Right?
Yeah.
Like, you don't survive in the NFL, and you sure as hell don't make the playoffs in the NFL without the ability to adapt.
Yep.
And if anyone's listened to our Deep Balls podcast with the NFL picks every week, I'm not high on Minnesota. I haven't been. But you can't win 10 games in the NFC North without being good. And I'll admit that. And Minnesota is good. I don't know. I don't watch them enough to know if we caught them on an off day, with that game. If it was just something where, a lot of the issues Seattle had with the Rams they were dealing with or whatever. But I am not expecting a 31-point victory in this one. I am expecting a victory, though. I think they are a lot better team than the Vikings. I still think the Vikings are on the good side of average, but they're in that middle tier of the NFL. I think the Seahawks are an elite football team. Is anybody here expecting it to be less than 7 points?
No.
Everyone is projecting the Seahawks win by 8 or more.
I don't think much more than 8, honestly. I think this is going to be a good
6.5 seems right, which I
It's down to
think
5.5.
Yeah.
it's down to 5.5.
Mm-hmm. I really expect this to be a good football game.
I do too.
I think this is, and maybe they pull away in the third quarter. I don't expect it to be like a Cardinals game, like we just saw, that's over at half. I don't in any way, shape, or form.
They've got some momentum too. I think the Seahawks are the only team they've lost to in the last 6
Well,
weeks.
and Mike Zimmer's a very good defensive coach, and you piss off a defensive coach by putting 38 up on, and he has film to tell his guys, dude, we sucked here, we sucked here, we sucked here. There's a lot of pride in that locker room. They're the division champs for a reason. They're going to want to come out and prove that they're no joke. And if you knock off the alpha, you're setting yourself up for a nice playoff run.
But if it comes in, if you guys come back next week and they've won by 21, would you be shocked?
No.
So I feel like a lot
after last week, you can't be shocked by them beating anybody by 21.
And that's what a lot of what I've heard and what I've heard on the radio is we're all doing what we're supposed to do, which is have the humility and say, no, this could be a good game.
Well, I thought they would blow out the Rams, so.
Yeah, that's true. I think I've called every game a blowout at this point. Oh, they're going to kick their ass.
I do think they're going to do that.
But me too. And I think there's an element of we've got the better team. I really believe that we have the better team. I think we've got the best team in the NFL. I think the DVOA shows it. I don't think there's much. I would be extraordinarily disappointed if it ended on Sunday and stunned.
I would be stunned. I don't think anything after the Minnesota game would stun me. Losing to Minnesota, I would accept it, and I would try to rebuild my life, but I would be stunned.
Yeah.
It's definitely going to be interesting to see what kind of adjustments we get from the Vikings, and it'll be interesting to talk about it again next week. We've taken up a lot of your time so far. I appreciate you sticking with us. A lot to talk about, it being the end of the regular season, transitioning into playoff mode. I want to thank you for your time. Jacson Bevens for Field Goals, here Matt Nichols. Thank you. Danny Kelly, Brent Cole. Any last words, guys?
Yeah, I'd like to thank Joel. I mean, Joel as we can sit and talk and have fun, but this guy's sitting there staying sober, making sure that this goes well.
And he actually has to do a lot of editing.
Yeah, and a lot of editing. So when you go through, if you've made it all the way through, and you've watched or listened to this entire thing, as we wrap up, just thank yourself. Thank you, Joel, for making this happen.
Truly.
Yes, this is Joel Litwin, and we appreciate it. If you're in Bellingham, in a couple Saturdays from now, go see his band Zoo Patrol.
Zoo Patrol, you might
at 7
recognize
o'clock
them
at
from some
the Great
of our bump music. Hey, also want to let you guys know that per many requests, many flattering requests,
you're taking your shirt off?
Not yet. The podcast can now be found on iTunes.
Nice.
Danny, thank you for setting that up. Joel, thank you for having the production quality necessary for that. Danny, you want to let them know where people can find this?
Yeah, so it's on the same RSS feed, so the iTunes feed, as the Deep Balls podcast that we do. And so, since Deep Balls won't be happening during the summer and during the off season, we'll probably just continue to post those on that one during the off season, and eventually we may move it, but we'll let you know about that. So just look up Field Goals Podcast on iTunes and you'll find it.
Right on.
Perfect.
Anything else?
Thanks to Glow.
Yeah, always Glow providing us with the potables.
Yeah.
Potable.
And of course the lovely couches, and just for kind of sequestering us, letting us do our thing. So thank you to Evan, Joey, and Nate for doing that, and we'll catch you guys next week.